There is no quick tip or 5-minute hack that I can point to that has helped me dial in better guitar tones. However, over the past 7 years of working on YouTube and in my own personal pursuits, there are certain exercises and mindset shifts that I've adopted that have helped me get that tone that I have in my head out into reality faster and easier than when I first started. My name is Steven, and today I want to share with you what I've learned around EQ, tone shaping, and most importantly, how to make sure you have the best source tone to start possible. Let's begin. Part 1, Guitar Tone Anatomy. The first thing, or the first idea that really helped me early on was learning how to hear and identify the important frequency ranges of the guitar. I'm going to use Pro Q3 to help show the ranges. I have the tilt set to 3 decibels per octave. It's something that I picked up watching a Nolly tutorial, and what it means is that pink noise shows up as more or less flat on the spectrum, so I know that generally my tone will be balanced when it is mostly flat across the spectrum. First up are the sub-lows, and that's going to be pretty much everything under 60 hertz. So this is only going to be a problematic area for your mix because this is not really information that's useful because it ends up just clashing with a lot of the other elements like your kick and your bass. Most mixers' first move in this area is going to be to high pass. You can go upwards of 40 hertz, 60 hertz. Some people go up as high as like 80 to 100 hertz, but that's going to entirely depend on your tuning, whether you're in drop A versus drop D versus F sharp standard on an 8 string. Information in this area isn't going to be very audible on your headphones or your speakers. It's pretty much useless to your guitar tone. So high pass it, get it out of there. You don't need it. Next area is the cab resonance, and it's around 60 to 100 hertz. Now, I've recently seen some guitarists like Josh Middleton of Silosis talk about boosting the cab resonance around this area and then cutting the lows just above it. Now, this is called the Pultec trick, and I haven't done this too much myself, but if you try it, you'll just need to be mindful that that is an area in which the bass occupies a lot of real estate, so you'll need to be careful when balancing those two. But this is a really fascinating idea, so I will be trying this later in the video. Next up are the lows, and that's an area between 100 hertz and around 250 hertz. This is an area where things can get cloudy very quickly. When you hit any chugs, there's a bloom of low-end information, and you can either cut this with an EQ or use something dynamic to duck the area whenever chugs are present. However, cut this too much and you'll end up making your guitar sound really thin and weak. Now, the low mids between 250 and about 500 hertz, this is an area where the body and note definition of the guitar lives. And I've seen a lot of guitarists do the smiley face EQ curve and cut the mids out like a toxic ex-partner, but this is an extremely important area to your tone. I find I usually end up cutting a few decibels out around 350 just to avoid mid-range clutter in the mix. But you may ask, why not just dial in less mids on the amp? But I'd rather have more information in the guitars and cut them out than have not enough information and try and boost something that isn't there. Guitars can be very temperamental when it comes to processing. So while boosting isn't a faux pas, stick to cutting when you're corrective EQing. Don't worry, we'll go over boosting later in the video. Let's listen to that area. Now the high mids around 500 hertz to about 1000 hertz. Now this spot is much like the low mids in that you don't want to cut it too much, but if it gets out of hand, it can sound kind of nasally and a bit unnatural sounding. It just sounds really bad when you cut it too much. Now, the pick attack area is between about 1.5 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz. Now, this is a point where you can bring out a little bit more articulation in the pick attack. Now, this is an area where you can add the EQ after, but you can also add the EQ before the amp to exaggerate the pick attack even further. And here's what it sounds like with that EQ move before the amp sim. It's pretty subtle, but it's an interesting thing that you can add to your guitars to have them cut through the mix a little bit more. The next area is 3 kilohertz to 8 kilohertz. This is the area that guitarists new to mixing struggle with the most and tend to overdo their EQ. It's where you'll hear all of those annoying whistling and fizzy frequencies that kind of drive you nuts. But this is an area that is crucial to EQ correctly, since this is an area that competes for space with the vocals and several other instruments. Cutting too much of this area, though, will absolutely kill your guitar tone and leave your mix feeling a bit flat. Talking about the mistakes that a lot of mixers make in this area is notching out too many of these frequencies. And when you're mixing in solo, sometimes your ear will gravitate towards those really harsh frequencies, and you'll want to try and notch them all out with a really narrow cue. And then you're going to listen really closely. And you're going to feel really good about the moves you just made, but then you listen to it in context, and your guitars have zero presence left in the greater context of the mix. The last area is 8 kilohertz and above. Now, this area is really dependent on the style that you're going for. Some people low pass as low as 8 or 9 kilohertz to get any of the fizz out of the guitar tone, but for the most part, I tend to leave it alone unless I hear any specific nodes that are bothering me. So let's listen to that area just by itself. I'll just low pass to about 9 kilohertz, and we'll use the solo icon so you can just hear what this area sounds like. That doesn't sound so bad low passed. That kind of fizz is not super audible when you have the rest of the instrumentation in there. So that is up to your discretion whether you want to low pass that out or not. Let's talk about our first exercise that I want you to do. Now, in order to really get a feeling for what these areas sound like, a great exercise to use is, while in the mix, set your EQ bands to those frequencies, raise them until you can hear them clearly, drop them all the way down so you can't hear them anymore, and then raise them back up. Turn off the EQ, turn it back on, and then listen for the difference. Now ask yourself, what does it sound like as it's being reintroduced to the mix? What other elements is it interacting with? Is it masking or clashing with any of these? Part 2, the impulse response. This is a universal truth, whether you're recording in a full studio with cabinets and microphones, or whether you're recording at your home studio using amp sims. You don't start with a crappy tone and force it into something great. You start with a great source tone and then gently carve away what doesn't need to be there in the mix. For those of you using amp sims, one of the biggest points of leverage when it comes to getting a great starting tone is the impulse response. I'd argue that it's one of the most important aspects of your tone and often the most overlooked. So what is an impulse response? An impulse response in this context is a snapshot of a cabinet, speaker, room, microphone, and preamp. A signal is run through the signal chain, recorded, and then converted into a highly detailed EQ curve that represents the sound of that signal chain in that moment. This process is hugely beneficial to home studio guitarists using amp sims because then you can have access to an ungodly number of combinations of cabinets, speaker types, and microphones that would be way too expensive to purchase individually. However, this does pose a different problem: option paralysis. Too many options can cause hesitation and poor decision making because it's overwhelming to have so many options to choose from. And this is where the next exercise comes in that I use every time I'm dialing in my guitar tones. So let's start dialing in our tone with the stock IRs in the Fortin Cali and go from there. First, dial in the gain, how you'd like it, and then in the context of the mix, swap IRs about every 2 seconds till you hear something that locks in, either mentally or on paper or a doc. Take notes on what you liked. Stop after a couple of minutes, maybe 5 at the most. Listening to distorted guitars, especially at loud volumes, will fatigue your ears, causing you to lose perspective. So take a break, eat some food, touch some grass, and then do it again. The more times you repeat this exercise over the course of weeks and months, the more you'll learn to trust your ears, and you won't need to spend nearly as much time dialing in tones. So let's get started. So I've already dialed in my gain structure how I like. I used the Fortin hex drive. You can see my settings here. And then I'm going to turn off the second IR and just concentrate on using a single IR for the start, just to get my bass tone right. So I like the Dynamic 57 probably the most out of these stock IRs, which is pretty typical. A Dynamic 57 is a very standard microphone to use in metal. I liked a couple of the other IRs as well. I know that the 57 paired with the Dynamic 421 is a pretty classic pairing, also Condenser 414, but I may actually want to try the Condenser 184 because that has a nice mid-rangey kind of sound to it as well. The Ribbon 121 was a little too nasally, a little bit too low-end heavy for my taste, as well as the Ribbon 160, which is pretty typical for Ribbon microphones. Ribbon microphones are going to be a little bit darker in tone, where the 57 and the 421 are going to be a little bit brighter. So since I got a 57, let's dial in the position and the distance a little bit, and then I'll add in a second IR just to see if I can kind of reinforce that 57 with some tones that I like a little bit better. Similar to the EQ exercise, what I'm doing is I'm moving the position and the distance to their most extremes, so I know I have a reference of what I'm listening for as I'm moving them back and forth, so I can kind of dial in that sweet spot where I like them to be. Now, as I add in the second microphone, I'm going to go through the exact same exercise. I like the Dynamic 57 that I've already done, so I'm going to go through, and every 2 seconds or so, I'm going to swap to another IR in its generally default position so I can kind of figure out what I like in combination with the 57 I've already chose. I like it. I like the where the tone is at. The 57 plus the condenser 414, pretty classic combination again. And my guitar tone is pretty flat across the board, aside from like a very slight dip around 350, which is generally what I like anyway. So this might be the sweet spot where I want it to be at for this mix. I'll go ahead and save this as a preset, and we'll come back to that. Because now what I want to do is use third-party IRs. Now, Fortin was kind enough to send these Replicant audio IRs over, so I'm going to go through the exact same exercise and dial in tones using those. And the reason why I want to go through this is because there are so many third-party IRs on the market now that you have such choices. I want to give you sort of a framework on how you can test these out and really make sure that you're getting the best out of your third-party IRs. So let's once again turn off the second IR. So from the drop-down menu, you're going to go to Load Custom Impulse Response. You're going to navigate towards the impulse response folder, and then you're going to double click, and that's going to go ahead and load the impulse response that you selected. The cool thing is that if you have a whole bunch of impulse responses in the exact same folder, you can then just hit the right and left arrows, so you can then swap between any that are in the folder. So now let's go ahead and go through the exact same process that we did with the stock IRs, and then we'll go ahead and try and pick out our favorites with an impulse response from a third party. I really like this, what is it, MT87. This one sounds really, really nice. Let's go ahead and navigate to the same folder, and we'll try and blend one of these together, see what we like. Sounds pretty good. Let's check our Pro Q. Pretty flat. Again, just like a slight dip around 460, which is fine. I like the way that this sounds. I like it a lot. And for our last exercise when it comes to impulse responses that has helped me was creating guitar tones that sounded like other artists. The Artist Tone series was one of the core pillars of the content that I made for Neural DSP's YouTube channel, and it really gave me an interesting perspective on trying to emulate other people's guitar tones and kind of get into the mindset of dialing in their tones like them. It gets you an outside perspective, gets you outside of your own little box that you try and create for yourself. So it really helps with creativity. Now this video is already going to be long enough as it is, so I'm just going to give you the step-by-step. So you drag a track of theirs into your DAW, select a riff or a section with as little instrumentation around the guitars as possible, or where the guitars are very prominent in the mix. Record the riff yourself, dial the gain to taste, and level match with the amp. Swap your IRs till you find something that sounds similar. You'll know when you get the right IR, when your guitar becomes almost transparent, it almost disappears and blends in with the guitars of the track. Then you can fine-tune the IR position and add a second IR and start the process all over again. Eventually, if you do this enough, you'll have the ability to pick out specific mics, or at least the type of mic used, like a dynamic, a condenser, or ribbon, in the recordings, because they all have very distinct characteristics. Now, having said all this, I want to caution those who would simply copy their favorite guitarist's tone. This is a great exercise and can help give you incredible insight as to how your favorite guitarists create their sound. But if you leave it at simply copying their sound, you're doing a disservice to your own unique sound. Not to mention, none of the other instruments in your own band will sound the same, so your copied tone may not even fit within your own mix. So create these guitar tones as an exercise for training your ears to hear the specifics of what makes a guitarist's tone unique. Part 3. Corrective EQ versus Sweetening EQ. Now that we know what we're listening for from part 1 and we've dialed in our IR to get our source tones to be the best starting point possible, now we get into how and when to apply EQ to our guitars. I usually think of EQ in two different ways, corrective EQ and sweetening EQ. Now, I always start with corrective EQ, so we'll begin there. Corrective EQ is anything to do with shaping the tone into your mix or correcting problematic areas. So how can we tell whether our guitar tone has a problem within the mix? Now, I have two methods I like to use, the first being the mute test. Now, assuming that you've gotten a good fader balance on your mix first, small changes may be difficult for your ears to pick out, especially when you're first learning how to EQ. Big changes are always going to be easy to pick out, so by muting the source and unmuting it, you're giving your ear a large enough change to be able to hear if anything is getting masked, or something's becoming too muddy, or whether something is poking out because it's too bright or fizzy. So let's go ahead and get into this. Let's go back to our tone that we liked, pull up our EQ. So I'm obviously hearing the low-end blooms whenever a chug hits. I'm hearing a bit of clutter around the mid-range, 350, 400 hertz. There might be some whistling frequencies in the presence, but so far the presence sounds pretty decent. I might boost it a little bit later when we get to that section. The second method I use is referencing a mix that I like. Now, this isn't advice to copy someone else's mix, but this is all about learning how to hear balance and relative loudness between instruments in specific frequency ranges. Metric ADPTR has been a huge help for me when mixing because I can load up songs directly into the plugin and swap back and forth between my mix and another, zeroing in on specific ranges and sections in order to hear where I might need to change things. Think of this plugin as your North Star, helping you keep perspective when maybe your ears aren't telling you the whole truth anymore. And yes, I'm using one of my own mixes because I don't want this video to get copyright struck. So we're going to listen to this verse riff and then reference back and forth. And I'm going to use the built-in Spectrum filters so I can really hone in on specific areas to find out where my issues are lying. So let's get started. Okay, cool. So I'm, again, hearing a little bit of those low mids are starting to cloud up the mix a little bit. And in contrast to the other mix, the guitars sound very full. They sound very clear in that area versus boxy in this current mix. Okay, so now that we know where our problem areas are, we can finally get to some corrective EQ moves with our guitars. I'm going to start off with Pro Q3 and then just move through the spectrum like I did earlier, going through each section of the guitar tone anatomy and figuring out what I need to do in order to improve this guitar tone. Okay, I had to move into solo in order to hear that frequency because it was kind of hiding from me. I could barely hear it, but it was something that was just a little bit poking out too much. And there's always a debate on whether you should mix in solo or mix in context, but I'm a proponent of both, but at the correct time. I make most of my wider EQ moves in context in the mix, but will solo the guitars when I need to narrow my focus on specific problem areas. As always, be sure to bypass your EQ or the specific move that you made so you can tell if you've made the right choice. Now, this sounds pretty good, but let's push this a little bit further with some sweetening EQ techniques that get you that last 5 to 10%. Now I'm going to grab an analog modeled EQ and start pushing some presence to sweeten up the tone. One of the most common plugins to use in this context, and there are about 1 million of these versions, is an SSL style EQ and to boost around 8 kHz. You may find you'll need to go back and cut the whistling frequencies a bit more with raising this area though. So let's pick an SSL style plugin and dig in. I'll use the case strip from Kiive Audio. This has a pretty nice SSL style EQ in it. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Now, if you have a plugin that has mid-side processing, you can add additional stereo width by changing the mid-range subtly between the two sides so they appear a bit wider in the mix due to the changes between the left and right channels. Let's go ahead and use some Pro Q3 again for this. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Create your band and then change it to right. Let's boost. Maybe it's around 400. One left. Move this down some. Or you can also cut both ways. This is fine too, if you don't want to introduce too many mids. Sounds pretty good. I added an additional side EQ band in order to push the presence a little bit further out in the mix. Gives it a little bit more stereo width to it. And lastly, let's go ahead and try the Pultec trick mentioned earlier in the video. So we're going to end up using a free version of the Pultec EQ. And again, this might or might not work. I might like it. I might not like it. We'll see. But we'll go ahead and give it a shot and see what happens. That actually sounds really nice with this. This is a free Pultec if you're interested in checking it out from Kiive Audio. This is probably, I may not go quite as steep on the boost with the low end and the cut, but this sounds pretty good as is. It might even actually be really, really good in instances where you turn this on while the guitar is by itself. Like if you have the rest of the band drop out and it's just the guitars chugging and kind of introducing or transitioning to a new section. This might be really, really good to kind of give the guitars some like balls and weight while the rest of the instrumentation isn't there. So again, use it at your own caution because this area could definitely clutter up the same real estate that the bass fundamental lives in. So just be aware of that. If I had to sum up the most important lesson in this video, always make sure your source tone is the best it can be to make your job as easy as possible. The saying, fix it in the mix, is absolute bullshit and will always create headaches for yourself down the road. If this is your art, put the time into making sure it's the best you can possibly create in the moment. Use these exercises and you'll begin to trust your ears to dial in the best tones possible in less time so you can spend more of your time actually writing your music rather than fiddling with IRs or hunting frequencies with EQ. Thank you for watching this video, and if you made it to the end and feel like you learned something new, leave a like, and if you want to see me back on the channel, leave a comment and let me know what subject you'd like to hear me talk about next. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.